just because I didn't see the thing in my, I didn't see the little button. There it is now. Look, I have a, first off, thank you for your, your comments about running for the Libertarian Party vice presidential nomination. I'm excited to have launched that today. And I still, despite being a libertarian, also support my basic income plan, which is a libertarian version of a basic income plan. It's a federal land dividend. And basically, the 50% of the most 11 Western U.S. states are essentially empty federal land. And so, my team and I have supported this idea of utilizing that empty federal land, monetizing it, leasing it out to big business in order to pay $1,000 a month, or hopefully even more, out to every single U.S. citizen out there. And this is a plan that's not going to actually raise taxes in any way like other UBIs, but this is a plan that will ultimately just shrink government while still providing free money, because you can shrink government because you would be able to take away some of the welfare services because you're providing a basic income. But the key is it's all done on federal land, so it's sort of a libertarian version of it.
I thought that was pretty cool, because a lot of what you're hearing is either based off of just changing existing programs or a value-added tax, which those are interesting in themselves, but you had an entirely new take on it, so I thought that was really cool. The second topic that I thought was, this encompasses so much, but self-experimentation. It's with drugs, it's with genetic modification, different things like that. Could you talk a bit about your view of self-experimentation?
Well, yeah, I have a chip implant for your viewers and listeners to know, and I'm a big supporter of the kind of the movement of biohacking, which is kind of part of the transhumanism movement. And it's this idea that you're okay with putting a lot of weird stuff inside you, and in fact, using genetic treatments to even change your DNA. I mean, I have friends that want to grow eyeballs on the back of their head, for example, and there's a possibility we'll be able to do that. I mean, there's already a possibility we could do it today. It's just what the FDA allows you to do and stuff like that. And but there's a whole new world out there about adding technology inside yourself, or adding new drugs and really changing the world around you as a result. I mean, people want ports, and we could tie a robotic eye already into the neural system to your brain, so that you can already see through a camera, and just like you would a normal eye. Now, the robotics eyes are not as good as our eyes yet, but they might be in 10 years. They're good for blind people. But that's kind of the issue is with biohacking, is that we want to become cyborgs, and we know that we're going to become better through these different types of technologies.
I think it's so fascinating to think about and to read about these things, and to see that we really are headed in these directions. But the traditional institutions that exist right now are so lagging behind. There's obviously some built-in inertia to, I mean, not only are the existing politicians right now, most of them, in my opinion, completely unfamiliar with a lot of this, but the regulatory systems that exist, the legal systems that exist, I mean, don't you think those are going to be the biggest sort of hurdles to this, along with the traditional, I guess you could say, like religious and ethical views of a lot of this?
Well, I absolutely do. I think the world is going to be really scared of a lot of this stuff at first. The biggest, I think, challenge and also threat, and maybe the benefit out there, is really using brain implants to connect directly to the cloud. And Elon Musk has a company, he's working on that. There's other people that have companies, they're working on that.
Sure.
Because we have a lot of jobs that are being replaced because people can't think as fast as machines, like traders or lawyers or insurance companies or whatever. And but how do we just allow people to put chips inside their brains that allow them to think faster and connect to the cloud? Can we have the phone in our mind? Well, the technology will be there definitely within 3 to 10 years, sometime around then. The question is, will society want us all to be plugged in, and what about our privacy issues? But that's why I think one of the things that I've been beating the drum on, and why I'm running again for office, is because I just want to bring these things up. It's not necessarily that I'm going to win any office anytime soon, but it's the idea that at least people hear it and they start thinking about it, and maybe we get lucky and Congress takes this up 2 years earlier than they would have otherwise, because Congress has a way of always taking things up after the fact, and then the damage has happened. So we need a government that's really quite aware. I mean, the coronavirus is a great example. It's like, here we are playing catch up to a virus that's completely, wasting away trillions of dollars of the economy and everything else, and causing deaths and whatnot. But we could have had a plan in place. We could have had universal vaccines. We could have had all this stuff had the government just been more worried about existential risk and viruses rather than whatever else, they've been worried about. And it's all about, thinking a little bit in advance and working it out. And especially when it comes to things like biohacking, where, we're talking about integrating technology inside the human body and also applying it to the human brain.
I want to go back to existential risk in a moment, but I'm glad that you brought up coronavirus. I was trying not to lead off with that because I know that, everything is focused on that right now, but I really do think that this virus is exposing all of the cracks in the existing system and institutions. And that if we look at this biological threat, and then we can shift towards the technological threat of how debilitating a similar technological virus would be, I'm hoping that we can essentially view those threats in parallel, you know what I mean? And sort of, as they merge together, as the biological and the technological merge together. I think this is quite an opportunity to start looking at things like that.
Well, there's no question that, and I hope I have an article coming about this soon, that, transhumanism, the field of kind of merging people with machines and trying to use technology to live indefinitely, has gotten a big boost from coronavirus, because what once seemed like a fringe movement is now all of a sudden, hey, wait a sec, those guys that are working on this stuff, they're not so crazy as we thought, especially now that we're using them to try to develop a vaccine as quickly as possible to sort of, take care of the human race.
Yeah.
So transhumanism is getting kind of this big, I guess, little spurt of interest, because all of a sudden everyone's like, well, yeah, I guess nobody really wants to die from disease. Transhumanists' main mantra, our number one goal is to declare aging a disease. But it's the idea that we just completely hate. We hate diseases. We hate aging. We hate diseases. We hate terror. We hate, suffering. We hate anything that has to do with bad health. Yeah. And, coronavirus is quite bad health if the virus affects you in a very negative way, as it does some people. So people are getting interested as in the movement as a whole. And we'll see though, in 6, 12 months, hopefully when this is over, if that carries through or if it's just a temporary thing. I think it's increasingly going to become a more important movement as the world, takes itself more seriously in terms of not wanting to die. I think a lot of it also has to do with religion. If you're a culture that doesn't believe in an afterlife, then that's something that's really then coronavirus really bums you out if you don't believe in an afterlife. If you believe in an afterlife, well, you think, oh, I'm gonna at least see my family again or go to my creator or whatever. So I think it also has to do with a lot of one's perspective on life after death as well.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And this must be a very vindicating moment for transhumanism. And I'm sure that, some of the bubble is going to die down, but a lot of that growth and interest is going to remain, and people are going to continue to pursue it. But it's interesting, the declaring aging a disease, or looking at it like a disease, because so many people, from what I've seen, they say, oh, well, like death is just a natural part of life. And like, who are we to play God and try to, it's always been a part of life. And I kind of look at that as the attitude of somebody who doesn't realize that they have that view because there was never an alternative before. You know what I mean? I think a lot of people would switch pretty quickly if there were an alternative.
Yeah. And that's really what we're trying to give them. It just hasn't really been until the last 5-10 years that we could honestly say, hey, in 10 or 20 years, we're going to have an alternative. So you got to make it that long, and that applies to everything else that you're going to have in your life, that that kind of comes afterwards. But I think it's just, it's probably after this, people won't forget about transhumanism and it will grow. When you look at kind of like movements that have grown, it often comes from kind of a historic event. Sure. Like Greenpeace, for example, the environmental movement began growing when the Greenpeace people first took on nuclear test explosions in Alaska. And that got him a lot of media attention. And everyone said, oh, wait a sec, there's a movement to save the planet. Isn't that weird? And then Greenpeace went out with their boats and started saving whales. And trying to get in the way of whaling. And then all of a sudden they filmed all this, and then they brought it back to, the West, and they said, look, it's not just about, it's a comprehensive philosophy of saving planet Earth. And all of a sudden, the environmental movement went from like 500 people to where it is now, which is multi-billions of people, essentially, that subscribe to being green. And that took course over a 30, 40-year period. We're hoping that coronavirus might be the big first step in transhumanism, kind of going from being this, smaller, not a fringe movement anymore, but getting into the mainstream. And then we'll see, whatever happens next to make it even bigger. But
Sure.
That's the trajectory of social movements. Kind of interesting as you think about it.
Yeah. And so hopping backwards for a moment to this kind of should have been shoehorned in the tail end of UBI, but you were talking in your book, Upgrading America, about how, if we have a UBI system, a universal basic income, and if we're the only system, if we're the only country in the world or one of the first to have it, then obviously we're going to be sort of like, the beacon for everybody across the planet to come here. So immigration is going to become much more important. And as you point out, as jobs are lost to automation, there's going to be fewer jobs for those people arriving. So you talk about drones with in relation to immigration, in relation to criminal justice and things like that. But you also talk about sort of the global order and how it could go two different directions, more nationalistic and more globalist. Can you kind of address how you think that might evolve over time?
Sure. Well, I would prefer the globalistic approach towards the world.
Sure.
And, people dislike me sometimes when I talk about eventually us getting to a single world government, because they think it's some giant conspiracy. And it's not that I even support a single world government. It's what I support is a single set of moral standards across all the planet, where, some cultures don't have the ability to beat their wives or whatever.
Yeah.
It would be nice if we didn't have child labor, in some part, and there is kind of some universal rules. And as a libertarian, it'd be the non-aggression principle, which is you don't hurt anyone else for any reason unless they're trying to hurt you, kind of the golden rule. But
Sure.
I think ultimately speaking, and I have pretty much an open immigration policy. However, I don't think it would be fair for Americans if all of a sudden, like let's say I became president tomorrow or vice president, whatever. And I was able to say, okay, I want mostly this open border policy. And then I instituted a universal basic income. Well, obviously we couldn't pay a universal basic income for everybody. So at some point you have to say, well, the immigrants can't get the universal basic income until maybe they've contributed to the system enough. But
Sure.
what I would really work on is saying to the world, we have all these natural resources. Let's all initiate a universal basic income based on the same principle. We don't pay taxes for this basic income. We just, let more and more businesses take over the federal land, and they have to pay money for that right to do so. And they can make money, and then we get some money, and everybody then gets their basic income. And all of a sudden, it's like the whole world is supporting this, because, it's not just America that has empty federal land. I mean, Russia has so much federal. Think of something like Chile or Argentina. I mean, we're talking, Patagonia. I mean, there's an enormous amount of resources out there. It's not a question of the resources. There's plenty enough resources to feed everybody and give everybody a great life on planet Earth. The problem has been that we haven't had distribution of the resources in any kind of sensible way. It's all gone to the very top, to the rich, and the poor have been sort of left struggling. And so what I would suggest is a universal basic income that at least takes care of the basics. So even if you're super poor, you can have basics. But we also must initiate this real expansion of using drones and robots and all sorts of automation to extract those resources, to make those resources more economical. And that's, not necessarily having somebody digging a ditch when we could have a robot do it 100 times faster.
Thank you for saying that.
And then everybody can very much live at least with the basics covered. They can decide if they want to be wealthier and go off and do more businesses, but at least we won't have this. And I think this is very important. The reason I think this is very important is because the transhumanist age is based upon the people not picking up their pitchforks and going after governments, scientists, rich people, and entrepreneurs. It's based on all of us together, rich and poor, saying we're okay with the system. If you make people, the masses, too upset and they say we want a revolution, that is not good for science.
Yeah.
That means that people like you and at our age will never see an indefinite lifespan. We'll never see the transhumanist age because we'll die, because science will get set back, already 10, 20, 30 years. In fact, that's been one of the dangers about coronavirus, is that when you take the economy down so much, how many years do you actually lose of research if budgets end up getting cut by 30, 40% over a 5-year period? Lives are actually lost down the road because we haven't achieved the transhumanist age fast enough. So there are some very interesting philosophical and ethical questions. And that's one of the reasons I support universal basic income, is because I want my neighbors happy and I want everyone happy, because the happier they are, the quicker we're all going to get to a point when we can actually use science and technology to end suffering and really revolutionize humankind.
In the human race advances. I mean, these are 21st century ideas, and it bugs me to no end that so many of our politicians are stuck into 20th century ideals and views of the problems. And, one example being a jobs for all program, like you were just alluding to. Like, it bugs me to no end that people who aren't familiar with technology don't realize how hard we're going to have to lean on the levers of technology to solve all of these problems that we continuously go around and around about. So the last topic that I really wanted to address was, and by the way, I trust you a lot more than a lot of other people who talk about this, because your personal experience with your family, I believe your parents came directly from Communist Hungary, right? So you see how, totalitarian systems can be. Like, you have an appreciation for not trying to create something like that or see something like that come about.
Yeah, no, that's true. My parents actually escaped Communist Hungary in the middle of the night. They even had to leave my my sister behind, because at the time when you were trying to escape a communist country, you couldn't even take a chance of having a baby cry out in the middle of the night, because you're walking across fields with landmines. And so they had to get her like 6 years later, when the kind of communist bloc fell down. But it was very radical. But yeah, I've been very much against communism since then. But the other reason I'm against, a lot of totalitarian governments is, as a journalist for National Geographic in my 20s and early 30s, I've seen war zones. I've seen what dictators do. I've seen what, military does. It's like, people don't really realize that wars destroy everything. It not just destroy your loved ones. It destroys supermarkets. It destroys hospitals. It destroys roads. It destroys crops. And I think people, the most important thing we can do for ourselves and for society is just try to get along and move forward with prosperity in mind, and not ego and conflict.
Yeah, precisely. And so I don't think we're going to really have time. I want to stick to the, the 30-minute mark as promised, but I want to say, everybody watching, listening to this, I know you can't see this if you're listening, but Zoltan's book, one of several books, Upgrading America, get it on Amazon. He breaks down in every chapter. There's a bunch of things, tons of stuff that I didn't cover here, but a couple interesting ones that I had wanted to get to were your views on privacy, and how in the longer term, having radical openness and visibility might actually be better for liberty than this idea of privacy. That's really cool. Also, your chapter on existential risk and space exploration, and there's a bunch of other ones as well. But the end of the program, I just wanted to ask you, aside from your own books, and definitely the Transhumanist Wager is on my list, are there any other materials that you'd recommend that people pursue, people seek out on these topics?
Well, I think just basically, I've written, a couple books. We have a new one coming out probably in 2-3 months.
Oh,
but what's happened is I've written 230 opinion articles, and I think it's, if you just have any idea of something you want to read, let's say it's, transhumanist sex, for example, or it's virtual reality and infidelity, or it's even aliens and artificial intelligence. I've written about it. So just Google it and you'll find it. And of course, in terms of other books that are out there from other authors, just go on Amazon. Transhumanism has grown. A lot of academics write about it. So there's a lot of good academic writing.
Got a couple.
Yeah, of course. And Homo Deus, I mean, that's kind of in the singularities near. These are some of the granddaddies. The Transhumanist Wager is really the one novel of the movement, and you'll really enjoy that if you like the essays, because it puts it in novel form and in a story that's quite exciting. And you know, there's love and death, and you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It's got the scope while still going over a lot of the ideas. It's funny because the one thing, I didn't come into love universal basic income until after I wrote that novel. But my novel, even though it's almost 10 years old, has all the other ideas in it. It's funny, if I ever went to rewrite like a second a sequel, it'll probably include my you know, kind of universal basic income ideas.
Sure.
In the story, though, it's very much based on kind of libertarian capitalism and things like that. But either way, it's a great story, and there's just a ton of good books out there, and just Google and find and dedicate yourself. And I'll just say one other thing. When people often ask me, what is the field that's best to go into to help the transhumanist movement forward? And I just say, look, try to become some type of scientist or engineer, because those are going to be the fields here in the near future that we need the most to really push this forward. I can't say it again, the heroes of the transhumanist movement are the scientists and the people that are actually in the laboratories working on how to make you and I live longer.
Mm-hmm. Well, Zoltan, thank you so much for taking the lead on these topics, and thank you for trying to get the Libertarian Party to be taken more seriously again. You talk about that in the book. I've seen some documentaries and programs recently, like in Tiger King, when Joe Exotic ran on the Libertarian ticket. I saw the John McAfee documentary. He ran on the Libertarian ticket. You know, you get sort of bad press from things like that. So thank you for taking it in a more serious direction again. I really commend you for that.
Oh, no, thank you. I will. I stay kind of in the Gary Johnson mold, just trying to be, you know, normal and with some good freedom ideas. So we'll hopefully, you know, we'll see how we do in the vice presidential race. I actually feel like I have a pretty good shot at it.
Excellent. Well, I'll be rooting for you. Zoltan Istvan, everybody. Look him up, check him out, read his books. Thank you, Zoltan.
Hey, man, thank you so much for having me, and it's been great to chat with you.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye, man.